Is the Retorid Pocket 3 worth the extra money over the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus? Well, there's three answers to that. The Retorid Pocket 3 was first announced to a whole load of hype, but then it was followed up with a lot of controversy, with shenanigans around the advertising material comparing the Retorid Pocket 3 to the Retorid Pocket 2 instead of the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus, and then there was Taki's video. Retroid, a company that holds a strong reputation in the retro gaming community for producing really affordable and really well-powered retro gaming handheld consoles, was starting to look like their reputation might be tarnished. Now, the number one question and the most important thing to address is, does the Retorid Pocket 3 enable you to play more games than the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus? And the answer to that is yes, it lets you play way more games than the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus, but maybe not in the way that you initially expect. When it comes to retro emulation, the Retorid Pocket 3 doesn't add a lot of grunt or power over the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus. However, the little bump in RAM from 2GB to 3GB could have potentially made a little difference, and that's why I made sure I got the 3GB model so I could compare the two. From every test I've done testing the emulation capabilities of the Retorid Pocket 3, I can't see any difference to the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus. And I do have a comprehensive video comparing the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus and the Retorid Pocket 3 for PlayStation 2 and GameCube games, and you can see a direct comparison in that previous episode. So I don't want to waste too much time talking about something that's already quite well covered. The Retorid Pocket 2 Plus was already fantastic for retro game emulation, covering everything all the way up to the PlayStation 1 generation and N64, and even providing the capability to play a small selection of PlayStation 2 and GameCube games. And the Retorid Pocket 3 Plus does exactly the same as well. So if you don't have a Retorid Pocket 2 Plus, the Retorid Pocket 3 will give you that wonderful same experience. But what differentiates the Retorid Pocket 3 from the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus, and what makes it worth that extra money? And it is without doubt the form factor and the Wi-Fi capabilities. The form factor fits much more in that comfortable zone for me as an ideal handheld system. The shape of it and the positioning of the analog sticks, as well as the triggers, were all things that I always look for in a handheld system. Things that I find are essential for comfort and how easily it allows you to play video games. The Retorid Pocket 3 sits perfectly in that Goldilocks zone of size for a handheld console. It's big enough to be able to enjoy a wonderful screen and comfortable controls, but it's not too big that you can't still put it in your pocket and take it around. Honestly, I knew this console was going to be more to my likings, but I didn't expect how much I was really going to like the look and feel of this until I got it in my hands. In terms of shape and size, it's bigger than Retorid Pocket 2 Plus, but smaller than a Nintendo Switch Lite. And I have to say, of all the retro handheld systems I have, as a matter of fact, in terms of all the handheld systems I have, this might be my number one favorite in terms of size, shape, and form factor, apart from the PS Vita, of course. And this is where the Retorid Pocket 3 really starts to elevate itself above the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus. Not just in the feel and the form factor and the better screen, but the addition of the L3 and R3 buttons. Although they seem like a nice to have, they have completely expanded the scope of video games that you can play on the Retorid Pocket console. Game streaming through systems like Game Pass and the new PlayStation subscription service were available on the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus. However, you were limited with the games you could actually play because the controls didn't fit the more modern generation. But the Retorid Pocket 3 completely solves that issue and opens up the entire world of game streaming to be available in the palm of your hands. Throw in the improved Wi-Fi and the Retorid Pocket 3 is an absolute game streaming beast. With the extra controls, the bigger screen, and the fantastic pocketability, I would say the Retorid Pocket 3 is the best value and most well-balanced game streaming handheld you can get right now. Now, personally, I've not seen any of the issues that Taki did identify. I've had no issues when lowering the brightness of the screen, although I have got issues with the brightness of the sun right now, but that's a different problem. What makes things even better is that although the Retorid Pocket 3 is more expensive than the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus, I was really surprised when I opened the package to see how many extras came in the box. Now, it's been talked about to death in the community, so I didn't want to go into too much detail in this episode, but for those that don't know, the Retorid Pocket 3 has more clicky buttons, as opposed to the smoother buttons as most people prefer on consoles like the AY and Odin. But Retroid threw in all the components you would need to be able to swap out the clicky buttons and change them to those smoother ones if you felt like you had the confidence to open up your console. We all knew that was coming, but what did come as a surprise was to see a 32GB SanDisk memory card bundled in there as well. Now, a 32GB memory card is not massively expensive, but it's an extra £10, an extra $10 you don't have to spend, which effectively brings the price lower and closer to the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus. So the question remains, is the Retorid Pocket 3 worth the extra money over the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus? Well, there's three answers to that. First answer, if you don't have a Retorid Pocket 2 Plus, definitely get the Retorid Pocket 3. It's a fantastic console and improves on the Retorid Pocket 2 Plus in so many areas. Now, if you already have a Retorid Pocket 2 Plus, the question needs to be, are you into retro gaming or are you into game streaming? If you're into retro gaming, the Retorid Pocket 3 is not worth extra. But if you're into game streaming, it is well worth the extra money for all the extra games you can play in a much more comfortable fashion. Now, if you enjoyed this episode and content like this, then check out this awesome video right here.